Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the research proposal that I created that studies the effects of appropriate accommodations, decreasing anxiety, and increasing Ames-Webb scores. So first we want to think about what the problem is. So throughout my research, it has shown that there has been an increase in students who have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. This can make the testing process much more daunting for these students because they fear that they're going to make mistakes or that they're going to score imperfectly. And in addition to that, anxiety is a common disorder that can be overlooked when thinking about accommodations that students need. To continue on, this study is going to evaluate how student scores on reading and math Ames-Webb assessment tend to suffer when students with anxiety do not receive the accommodations they need to be successful. As a classroom teacher, the researcher has noticed that students with anxiety need more individualized instruction and accommodations, especially when taking high-stakes tests. The proficiency scores of second grade students with anxiety at Creekview Elementary School show that a change needs to be made to ensure that these students have the accommodations required for them to be successful. So before we get to the data, we are going to talk a little bit about what you're going to see. So the data on the next page is going to show a huge need for students with anxiety to receive those accommodations that we mentioned previously. The data reflects that students with anxiety scored below 60%, the 60th percentile, and we consider 60th percentile proficient. So if we're below 60th percentile, we're not quite at that proficient mark yet. Or that their scores decreased from fall to winter when we would hope to see scores increase. It's important to note that some students did increase their scores from fall to winter, but their scores still fell below the 60th percentile. When students with anxiety don't receive accommodations, they aren't able to reduce their anxiety and show what they truly know on assessments. So if we look at some of this data, you can see that this student went from the 5th percentile to the 2nd percentile and from the 32nd percentile to the 12th percentile. So they had a steady decline. Student 2 increased in math significantly, but still they are not at the 60th percentile. We can see student 3 decreased here, increased in math, but still below the 60th percentile. Another good example is here, 53rd percentile decreased to the 42nd percentile. So this data just reflects the need for those accommodations because they haven't been getting them. So as far as our action plan, this research proposal targets the accessible population, which are the second grade students at Creekview Elementary School with a diagnosed anxiety disorder. These students were chosen because their debilitating symptoms that accompany test anxiety began to arise during this grade level when testing expectations also increase. All students will be provided extended time, which is time and a half, breaks, that depends on how long the test is, and then small group testing. So this quantitative study will use a non-random sampling technique of 7 students who have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. It's non-random because I'm specifically choosing students that have a anxiety disorder to use in this study. These 7 students will be administered the reading and math Ames-Webb assessment 3 times a year with those 3 accommodations, extended time breaks, and small group testing. And we'll get into the specific steps a little bit later. By providing these accommodations, the researcher hopes to see proficiency levels increase each time Ames-Webb is taken. The positive effects of this study should ensure that students with anxiety continue to receive accommodations that are vital to their educational growth. So it will show us that by giving them these accommodations, we need to continue doing that in order to help them grow. So during the fall, students with anxiety will be identified, which means just finding those students that already have an anxiety diagnosis. The next step will be implementing the accommodations that are identified based on if they already have an IEP or in a 504 plan. If students do not have one of those plans, then a plan will be created for them to receive those accommodations. Students will then be administered reading and math AIMSweb with accommodations 3 times for 8 months, which means once in the fall, once in the winter, once in the spring. So first it will be administered in September, the next time will be in December, and the third time in April. Students will take reading on one day and math on another day. It doesn't have to be back-to-back days. It could be Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday. Their scores will then be analyzed after their winter test to determine growth, because we want to see what happened from fall to winter. Did they grow or did they decline? And then scores will be analyzed again after the spring test to determine their growth from the fall to the spring. So when we're maintaining validity, we want to stress that AIMSweb is a national skills-based assessment. So that means it provides us formative data on grade level standards. So it's only assessing the students on second grade standards. No other standards are assessed. Creekview Elementary teachers and leadership use this data to determine their placement in our response to intervention program. All students will be administered AIMSweb reading and math assessments. Students will not take different assessments. Each student taking the assessment will do so with a teacher who is highly qualified in AIMSweb administration, and also that has some knowledge about providing accommodations for students with anxiety. All 7 of the students are going to receive the same accommodations, and then students will test in a neutral location. Moving on here, thinking about ethical considerations, we want to make sure that informed consent is obtained from the guardians of our subjects because they are minors. A consent form will be presented that details the study, the possible risks, the rights of the subject, and why they were chosen for the study. If consent is obtained, then students will be assigned a number that identifies them for the study. The primary researcher will be the only individual who can access the student names and their assigned number. Thinking about student achievement. So going back to the data suggests that students with anxiety need additional support to be successful because these students are battling those internal fears. They're having physical issues. They're worrying extensively, and they are having feelings of restlessness due to their anxiety diagnosis. Also, based on the data, anxiety can sometimes go unnoticed, which can impact student proficiency. When it's unnoticed, we can't give them the accommodations they need. This is evident because we still have students that are scoring below the 60th percentile on AIMSweb testing. Continuing on, there is a direct correlation between test anxiety negatively affecting a child's academic performance, especially on high-stakes tests. This tends to worsen when students aren't provided those accommodations to help reduce their anxiety. Students with anxiety already have a considerable cognitive load, which increases when they are expected to perform well on academic assessments. Accommodations are meant to decrease the cognitive load that is already overwhelmed by the anxious behavior, therefore hoping their academic scores will increase. So in order for us to determine successfulness on the study, we want to make sure that students, number one, are provided with the accommodations that they need when taking these high stakes assessments. And then we want to see if students are scoring at the 60th percentile or making significant increases in their AIMSweb scores from fall to winter and fall to spring. So students might not necessarily be at the 60th percentile, but we want to see them getting close to that number. Thinking about, if I were to go back and make changes, I would take data into account from other school systems, specifically finding, how many students within other school systems have anxiety and what do their test scores look like. In addition, I would further investigate which accommodations are most appropriate for each individual student. I know that we chose 3 to focus on for this study, but moving forward, it might be good to think about some students might need breaks, but other students might not need breaks, but they need extended time instead. In addition to that, I think some other research that could be done to help improve student achievement would be to think about these 2 questions. How effective are the accommodations of having testing in small group extended time or having breaks. And then, when is a student's anxiety heightened the most during the day? I think these two questions would help us further our research of this topic and fully help students achieve to the best of their ability.